Okay, so how does this then link with what you call the mirage of democracy? Because is this again a sense which it seems as though what the lesson from the Anglican and the fundamentalist thing, that seems to suggest is if your modernity is going to work, you mustn't believe it too much.
Yeah.
You just got to believe it enough. And is this the problem with democracy at the moment and political dissatisfaction, that we've taken, if you like, democracy too serious? We're almost believing the rhetoric around it too much, and that actually, if we would just step back a bit and see actually how it is this delicate balance, we wouldn't be pulled into the mirage as much and wouldn't be therefore as dissatisfied.
Absolutely. It's a belief which you've lost the understanding what the purpose of it is, the function of it is, and you've gone for the external apparatus, so to speak. And I mean, while democracy was being built up over the centuries in this country, it was constantly being contested, and many people said it's a sham, and people like Tocqueville and others pointed out its weaknesses, and Burke and others pointed out its dangers. But somehow it became a kind of almost fundamentalist creed, perhaps at the time when it became universal. I mean, before, no one really could very much believe in it because most people weren't part of it. I mean, it's just white men with a certain property and a certain age who could participate. So the rest could be pretty skeptical of it. And they say, well, they're the toffs, and they're... Once it became sort of everyone, women, the poor, the rich, and so on, and we were all part of the game, it then became very serious, and something which you thought was the solution, that we had reached the final stage in political development, which was government of the people, by the people, and so on. That wasn't the case in America, of course, with slavery and the rest of it. It wasn't the case here until after the First World War. So basically, from then on, we started to think we've really found the solution. And it's a mirage, because what was always there but was disguised were the various cracks and weaknesses and so on, which for some reason or other have become even more obvious. We've been over these in various ways. Firstly, new media and so on have shown that your leaders are corrupt and useless as you are. Secondly, more and more it's dawned on people that the idea of electing someone for 4 years, I mean, we associate democracy with the House of Commons and the electoral process. We forget that its primary function is to give you self-rule and self-government at a lower level. But we think of it at this national level. And at that level, we elect this. But the tyranny of the majority, which was pointed out by Tocqueville and others, in other words, you may be in the 49% or 48% who voted against Brexit, but you've got to lump it. And you're in the 48% who voted, or usually more than half who voted against a particular political party. They got in on a minority vote, and yet, because of the system, they get in. And so, are you represented by this lot or not? And then even the ones you voted for, you don't know them, you never met them, you have no ideas about them, and you have no idea what they promised. Who reads a party manifesto, and who, when reading a party manifesto, says, yes, I agree with all that? It's always got half of it you wouldn't agree with. So you're voting in a set of people you don't know for 4 years so that they can all change their minds at any point, and they do, on a set of promises, half of which you don't really like. Now, is that a perfect form of government? Of course not. And of course, everyone immediately then comes back with the Winston Churchill response, it's a useless form of government, but all the rest are more useless. And there is some strength in that. So if you said, well, do you want that, or do you want fascism, or do you want that, or do you want communism? But they are forced choices, because nowadays we can actually think, well, what are the purposes and why we're doing it, and how can we improve it? And how can we move away from this very simplified mirage that once you have the formal structures, in other words, you have an uncorrupt voting system, that's all you need, a voting system which is uncorrupt, then you will get a good outcome. And that form of concentrating on the mechanism is where it ties up with another mirage, which I've talked about a little bit before, but is worth linking here, which is the idea of the cargo cult, which is the anthropological observation of some people in New Guinea and elsewhere who thought that if you provide the mechanism, then you will get all the good things that seem to be associated with it. It's a form of magical behavior. So like any other magic, for example, if in many African tribes, it's believed that if you throw water around, then it will rain, because there's an association between water being flying around and rain. So just throw some water around and then the drought will be over. Now, the magic of the cargo cult is practiced by these New Guinea people was they saw these American planes coming in at the end of the Second World War, loaded with useful things like axes and motorbikes and whatever it was they wanted. And the Americans built a runway first, cleared the jungle, built a runway. Then these huge planes came in like magical birds. The back opened, out trundled all the motorbikes and axes, and life was wonderful. So they thought, well, the first thing obviously is to build a runway. So they built a runway. They chopped down the jungle and built a runway, and they stood there looking up, waiting for the planes to come down. Nothing happened. And that's what happened in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in all the places, Libya and so on. The West thought, all you need to do is to build a runway, which is basically put out the ballot boxes, give everyone a vote, and democracy will be there. Well, quelle naive thought, as they say. So democracy has become a mirage, and its nature, the degree to which it's a mirage, is shown increasingly by other places where it's been exported, as well as its failures here. I mean, there's huge criticism all the time of what's wrong with our democratic system and the American. But you just have to watch, as Sarah and I are watching films about India and the corruption, the violence, the lack of representation, the party politics, the factions and so on. Or you look at it in Bangladesh, or you look at it in the Philippines, or you look at it in Thailand. It may be better than an alternative, who knows, but it's certainly nothing to do much with what we think of as democracy. The people are not being represented. They're not governing themselves. It's filled with corruption. And this is the final point, really, is that somehow if you take too naive a view of this and superimpose it, it leads, and this may lead on to the next we could talk about, it leads to deep corruption, political corruption of a kind which may not be so present in other forms. I mean, one of the great alternatives to our system, of course, is the Chinese system. And the Chinese have their corruptions, but on the whole, surprisingly, for such a big country at the moment, and it's been cleaned up again by Xi Jinping, but its political system is relatively uncorrupt, depending on what you mean by corruption. So our rolling out of democracy, or the mirage of democracy, has led to this vast growth of political corruption in third world countries to which it's been taken.
And do you think